Hey there friends, what's going on? It's Codiak here, back for another Assassin's Creed Valhalla video, and today we're taking a look at the river raids. They've been out for a couple days, so what worked and what didn't? Alright my friends, the river raid update has been out for a few days now, and I wanted to break it all down, talk about the things that I liked, the things that I didn't like, and before we get there, I don't want you to think that this is a purely bashing video. I think there are elements of the river raids that work, that are on the right track, and I think there are elements of it that don't work. We're going to be very clear and concise. This does not need to be a 20-minute rant video. I want to talk about things constructively, and we're going to start, as always, with the things that I like. I always think it's nice to start with the positives. Now, the first thing I think is huge is that this update was free. Free content updates are the lifeblood of live service games, but that free content always should be backed up by good gameplay. Now, the thing that I really liked about this was that there really weren't any Helix items tied to the event. Yes, there were some new cosmetics introduced, but ultimately the rewards for doing the river raids were free. You just had to actually put in the effort to do them. And I really like that. I think that is at the core of a free content update. I know they've been pushing the river raids for quite some time, and it was good to see that they didn't introduce a brand new Helix set that was just an overpowered version of the St. George's set. That would have been a really big misstep in my opinion, so I'm really glad they didn't do that. I also really like the idea that the river raids is replayable content. Now, unfortunately, that means different things to different people. I do think that this is the most replayable content that they've put in the game. Most of Assassin's Creed Valhalla is go do all of these little things. Go get that wealth, go get that mystery, go chase down an artifact. This is the same thing over and over, and that is good, and I think that's something that should be introduced into Assassin's Creed Valhalla even more. In the modern era, smaller development teams have had to get smarter about the concept of a gameplay loop. And while some of the bigger developers have hopped on this trend, Ubisoft really hasn't. They still focus on kind of this spider meshing where you go off and do a million different things, as opposed to doubling down on one particular system that they like, augmenting it over time. We've seen this a lot with indie games, specifically the roguelite genre, which completely blossomed because of the gameplay loop philosophy, where you do the same kind of concept, but you keep augmenting it to make it better. I really think that's the framework for something like the river raids, and I wish they had leaned into that a little bit harder. We're going to talk about that because I think that's really at the core of everything that's going on with the river raids. Now, of course, alongside the content was also some bug fixes, and this is huge. There were so many issues that were addressed, and I've said this in the previous videos that I've made. Ubisoft, while they move slowly, they do address a lot of their issues. Of course, with a massive game like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, so many developers working on the project, you're going to fix bugs, you're going to make new bugs. And I think this patch did a really good job of fixing as many of the bugs as they said they were going to. There are still issues, that's no lie, but they did address some of the biggest ones plaguing the community. The most frustrating thing as a player when it comes to bug fixes is when a patch comes out and you don't see it in the patch notes, right? So they did a good job making sure that fishing was better. They cleared up a whole bunch of quest bugs that were preventing players from getting further into the story, which is a reason why a lot of players left. I do think it was a good job from the team. Yes, I know there are still issues out there. Yes, I know there are some new issues, but overall, they did fix a lot of the bugs that were the major ones in my opinion. Another thing I think they really did well with the river raids is the balance between content and rewards. Again, it's replayable content, it's gonna feel repetitive because of the lack of augmentation in the system, but there's also not a million rewards, so this is not something they expect you to do for weeks on end. I think it's really supposed to be a stopgap between the content that we've experienced before and the new content coming in the Wrath of the Druids. One full new set of gear. Yes, I know it's kind of a reskin of the Thane's armor, but I did like the color palette quite a bit. A new weapon, a new shield. I really think that's enough for this content. Unless they plan on doubling down on river raids in the future, I think it works. And as somebody that literally blazed through this as fast as possible to bring you guys information and guides, I took it in a day. That's not normal. Most casual players are going to take a week, 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks to complete this content, and then they're going to be thinking about the next DLC. It's a complete bridge between the base game and the Wrath of the Druids, and I think that is their goal. You have to remember, most developers, whether you agree with this philosophy or not, designed for a more casual audience, an audience that's not necessarily going to play a game for 20 hours a day. And from that approach, I do understand how the river raids are supposed to function and the people that they're targeting. Of course, hardcore players are going to get through this in a day, maybe two, and then claim it's not enough content. Most people don't play games like that. And sure, there are a lot of people playing games right now, but I totally understand where the Ubisoft team is coming from when it comes to the river raids. Now, that being said, I don't think the river raids are perfect. I don't want you guys to think that this is some glowing review of the river raids, because I'm a serious gamer, I like serious games, and I don't think the river raids really accomplish that. So let's dive into the things I didn't like. Now, of course, it doesn't take a brainiac to figure out that the river raids has to be one of the most boring gameplay loops out there. There's just no diversity of ideas here. You go to a point, you raid it, you get a few chests, boom, you're back in your boat. You go a little bit further down the river, you do that again. Seriously, guys, look at some of the roguelite games out there. Just think of games like Hades and Dead Cells that have this gameplay loop that is Loctite. It's very simplistic, but they're using augmentation to make it better. Assassin's Creed and these AAA games could really learn a lot from roguelite games, and I'm sure most of their developers have played those games. There is a reason why they work so well, and it's understanding at the fundamental level what makes a gameplay loop exciting for a player, and I just don't think the river raids really capitalizes on that. There were so many opportunities, specifically with the JOMSVIKIng, to advance that system and make it meaningful in the scope of the river raids. They could have even added affixes or enemy diversity, anything to the river raids to make there feel like there was something that was constantly changing every time I went back there. As soon as I fired up the game, as soon as I fired up another river, I knew it was going to be the exact same thing I just did. Maybe the last one, that big castle at the end of the third river, was a little different, but everything leading up to that was just the same. This idea of a boring gameplay loop on top of a relatively boring concept wasn't made any better by the fact that the JOMSVIKIng system didn't really shine the way that they were pitching it in the post-launch content trailer. They were hyping this thing up from the beginning as a real advancement in the system, making it more meaningful, making it deeper, and we really didn't get that. Sure, there's a slight leveling system to the JOMSVIKIng, they can carry a ration on them, things like that, but ultimately, they're just more mindless soldiers that follow you into combat. No interaction with them other than the fact that they run alongside you as you're storming a settlement, and of course opening chests, but that's not advancing the system, that's just more of the same. And that was a really big disappointment because they made such a point of saying that the JOMSVIKIng system was something they really cared deeply about. Now, I know a lot of you are going to say, well, you can never trust anything Ubisoft says, and sure, that may be true, but of course there are developers on this project that do care about the game and do care about the players that are playing this game. So I think having that kind of jaded attitude all the time is really distracting from the actual concepts and the gameplay systems that we want to talk about. Another issue for me, and this one actually perplexed me, was that the enemy diversity was worse than ever. I really felt like during the base game, things were good. It was a nice mix of the swordsmen, the spearsmen, the flails, all of them. But when it came to the river raids, I felt like I was fighting groups of the same enemy. Like I would go up to an area and I'd fight like 4 skirmishers at a time, and I really didn't understand that. I don't know if the algorithm was wrong and the machine was just spitting out the wrong NPCs, but it was very strange, and I found it really strange that they didn't add a new enemy into the mix, even just one enemy, because you know they could have used that in the future content updates. Now, obviously, in the Wrath of the Druids, I expect we're going to see new enemies over in Ireland, but it would have been a good tease to introduce one of them, at least one of them, in the river raids. Another head scratcher for me was the obstacles on the river. Now, I don't know if you guys picked up on this, but as the alert level was raised, new things would pop up on the river and they would try and slow you down. But if you're anything like me, you just ignored them and kept going. They were pointless, and that's really what I'm getting at here. Now, I don't think it would have been any better if they forced you to stop, but for the most part, I just felt like the obstacles were just there to be annoying for that half second, but you could completely ignore them. So not great implementation of that idea. Some other little things really bothered me too, like the lazy naming, like Eastern Fortification, Western Fortification, Hillview Outpost, like just things that could have had more intricate names. This is such a small nitpicky thing, but if we're going to all of these different locations and they're all just popping up, specifically because we're doing them in back-to-back succession, it just felt lazy. Again, you couldn't come up with a better name than Island Camp. Just felt kind of weird, kind of lazy, but I know what you're already typing in the comments. That's Ubisoft for ya. Speaking of laziness, this one really grinded my gears. The copy pasta literally everywhere. All of the outposts, for the most part, were copy and pasted from other parts of the River Raid content. And that's really a huge issue for me. I don't care if you copy and paste it from something in the base game, but when you're going from River 1 to River 2 and you're experiencing the exact same things, well, that's a problem. There was enough diversity there that I could identify, oh, this is new, this is exciting, but when you run into the same building 3 times or the same layout 3 times, things get a little weird. And for new content, and let's be honest, not a lot of content, you think they would have come up with some slightly newer prefabs that they could put in different configurations to at least make the replayable content a little more interesting. A quick hit here, I also thought the champion was terrible. I love boss fights. I think they've done a really good job with boss fights in the game for the most part. Not everyone is a stellar knockout, but I think for the most part the boss fights are good in the game, and I thought the champion was incredibly campy, incredibly corny. There was really no setup to him, which I found to be the biggest problem. That should have been introduced at the beginning. He should have been a constant threat on the rivers somehow. That could have been a gameplay system. And then eventually we get to this castle and he's there and we fight him. We didn't get any of that. Barely any setup for the champion, just one note and some mentions in the trailer, things like that. And I think that was a huge missed opportunity, a way to introduce another great boss fight into the content. Ultimately, it fell flat, and while it was a nice conclusion to get a sword, I think the boss fight itself was just a huge swing and a miss. Finally, we have to talk about the bugs. Like I said, they did fix a lot of bugs, but they also introduced some new bugs. I'm pretty sure that's just standard fare for a Ubisoft patch at this point. Some of the biggest ones being reverting pieces of gear that people have paid for, either reverting back to a previous state or disappearing entirely. That's a huge no-no. I hope they address this. I hope they fix this. People, you should not spend more money for this gear. I know it's frustrating, but do not spend more money for gear that they broke after you've already paid for it. Some of the other issues include raid locations remaining raised after you've already pillaged them. This can be fixed by just going to another river, messing around over there for a few seconds, going back to the first river, and most of the time those issues are fixed. Not always, but most of the time. And of course, there is still some hangover from issues that were plaguing the game before the patch. Obviously, the solution for this is just to make sure that the Ubisoft team knows about these issues. That's the only way they're going to get fixed, if they get fixed. But yeah, I do think for the most part they did a good job fixing the bugs. Yes, there are some new bugs, but ultimately it's not the end of the world for most of us. I know a lot of players are still frustrated with bugs, but I think for the vast majority of players, a lot of the issues have been fixed. And there you have it, friends. All of the things that I think worked, all of the things I didn't think worked, but of course, I want to know what you guys have to say. What are the things that you liked? What are the things that you didn't like? Don't just write, I hated all of it. Ubisoft is lazy. That doesn't help anybody. Really think about what you liked, what you didn't like. Let me know in the comment section below. We've actually had some really good discussions in comments of videos like this before. So if you have a few minutes, share your thoughts. And of course, if you guys like this kind of content and you want more Assassin's Creed Valhalla in your feed, don't forget to hit that thumbs up and of course subscribe to the channel. We've got a lot more coming in the next couple months with Wrath of the Druids and some Outriders content, so we hope you'll follow along as we continue our chase for 100,000 subscribers. My name is Codiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.